సభాధ్యక్ష ప్రవీణ్ గారు, ప్రియమైన మిత్రుల వేణు, రవి, ముందున్న అన్ని కామ్రేడ్స్, ఫస్ట్ తెలుగులో మాట్లాడాలి అనుకున్నాను. నా తెలుగు వేణుకు నచ్చదు, దానివల్ల నాకు వచ్చే ఇంగ్లీష్లో మాట్లాడతాను, క్షమించాలి. అంటే అంత బాగా మాట్లాడలేను కాబట్టి ఐ థింక్ యూ కెన్ బేర్ విత్ మై ఇంగ్లీష్ అండ్ సమ్ టుటా తెలుగు ఆల్సో. Friends and comrades, I consider this as a great privilege to participate in this convention. I thank Ravi for inviting for this convention. I share all the pain and the glory that the friends are been deliberating on this since from the morning. ఎందుకంటే దీనికి కొన్ని హిస్టరీ ఉంది. చెరుకూరి రాజ్ కుమార్ was also guiding the revolutionary movement in Karnataka and he was a close friend. And just 2 weeks before, on February 6th, 20 years before, in Karnataka, we lost a beloved comrade in a similar kind of encounter by name Saket Rajan. He is considered as a great intellectual. He had written 2 volumes about Indian history, calling it Making India, Making History, People's History of Karnataka, which has been actually prescribed as textbook for many universities in Karnataka. I share the pain. In fact, ఇది RSU 1990కి అఫీషియల్గా ఇట్ స్టాప్ ఫంక్షనింగ్ యాజ్ అఫీషియల్ ఆర్గనైజేషన్ అని చెప్పారు. ఇన్ఫ్యాక్ట్ ది హిస్టరీ ఆఫ్ RSU కంటిన్యూడ్ ఇన్ అదర్ స్టేట్స్. బిఫోర్ ఐ గెట్ ఇన్ టు ది టాపిక్ దట్ ఐ హ్యావ్ బీన్ అసైన్ టు, అండ్ ఐ అష్యూర్ యూ దట్ ఐ విల్ నాట్ టేక్ మచ్ టైమ్. I know since from the morning you have been sitting and there is another session. Before we conclude, I try to confine my speech within 15 or 20 minutes, but I should narrate my own story, my story as a personal history and also the revolutionary history, student history of Karnataka. In fact, I was an engineering student. I was an engineering student, and in fact, my introduction into this revolutionary politics happened from a student from Gadwal. There was a friend by name Anand, and I was an engineering student in a college, in a private college where I had a government seat, and he was a private seat in a private college, and he used, this was in 1985, he used to narrate lot of stories about RSU. Some of them actually thrilled us. In fact, one such story was about the village campaign. In fact, he said 1,200 students went to around 2,000 villages, and many of them stopped their education and became part of the revolutionary student movement. Was a history, and it was a kind of magic to us over years. That was a great inspiration, and that made us to actually think of what we are doing there. And some of the stories, like some slogans, for example, when ABVP wrote the slogan Lal Gulami Chodo Bolo Vande Mataram, the Warangal story, where the counter slogan was Lal Bano Gulami Chodo Bolo Vande Mataram. This was another thrill to us. And there was the great slogan of study and struggle, which was confronted through study through struggle. And especially as Venu and Ravi explained, there cannot be any change, structural change in the education system or the lives of the students until the system changes. These are the things which inspired us and the revolutionary student. In fact, some of the batchmates of our students, I think some 10 of them actually stopped education and actually became full-timers in the revolutionary student movement. Of course, some friends are in different politics, but that was the inspiration. And I was lucky enough to become the president of All India Revolutionary Student Federation in 1989. And I was closely associated with the different student movement, revolutionary student movements from different states. Say for example, Tamil Nadu. In fact, Comrade Vivek has also come from Tamil Nadu, and he will narrate the stories at how it inspired the student movement in Tamil Nadu. From Punjab, from Bengal, from Maharashtra, from Bihar especially. I think in that period, there were many students, comrades. I think at least 70% of them have become martyrs. The stories of martyrdom of these students have also inspired us to a great extent. So I share the glory. I share the pain, and I feel great. I feel privileged to be part of this great event. This is a courageous event of defiance. Let me congratulate the organizers. When the Home Minister is declaring that he would see that there will be no revolutionary movement, Naxalite movement by 2026, this is the event, this is a revolutionary act of defiance. I congratulate. Of course I have questions, of course I have some differences, but I am part of this legacy. Friends, how to understand the 21st century student movement? Before getting into that, I tried to sum up the story narrated by Ravi and Venu. How did the revolutionary student movement in the 20th century survived and continued? In fact, prior to that, prior to the history of the revolutionary students movement, RSU particularly, we had moments of revolutionary upsurge. Moment of revolutionary upsurge. Of course, all students will be agitating. We will be having a romantic infatuation with the rebellion. But this particular RSU gave a philosophical purpose. I think that is a very defining contribution of a revolutionary movement. You can be rebellious, you can be anarchic, you can be philosophically anarchic. Unless it is channeled into a constructive revolutionary imagination, it will not be productive. I think this gave a philosophical purpose. When I reflect on my own personal journey in the revolutionary movement, of course, I was rebellious. I had my own tussle with my parents who happened to be from Brahminical background. I was an atheist. But that was not enough. Why should I live? That is a philosophical question. Why should I continue? This gave a philosophical purpose to my life, and revolutionary student movement gave a vision and mission to each student. I think that's how RSU sustained in spite of repression, because it has defined my life. How and why I live in this world. And also the political ideological vision of how this dream, a great dream, can be realized. That did not, whether that will be realized or not, that's a different story. But whatever Kondapalli Sitaramaya gave a vision in 1980s, that was convincing enough. That in the present system of the prevailing semi-feudal, semi-colonial structure in the 80s could be confronted through revolutionary student movement and through revolutionary movement making the peasant movement as the axis. This gave a vision and a mission. And this gave a purpose for the students movement. And that's why it could sustain, it could reverberate in different states also. But of course, 90s came up with different questions. Post 90s, post 2000, it has different questions actually. The nature of the state completely changed. I will not take much of your time. I have questions in the post 2000 thing only. We have two enemies. We defined the 20th century as a radical upsurge in India, confronting the semi-feudal, semi-colonial state and dedicating ourselves to the cause of the new democratic revolution, which basically defeats the semi-feudalism, unleashes the democratic aspiration and constructs an imagination which will take us to socialist heaven. But then in the 90s, we have two enemies. State, as was discussed yesterday, in the morning, there is a global state. Not that the nation state have completely disappeared. Now you have a Trump who says that no more globalization, it's only nationalism, America first policy, make America great again. And our Prime Minister went there and said that not only MAGA, I will have MEGA also, make India greater. MAGA and MEGA becomes a mega. We call him MAGA MEGA Modi now. So, not that nation state have completely collapsed. In fact, Thomas Friedman, who is actually proponent of the free market theory, has made it very clear. Behind a free market, there is a fist of nation state also. So there is a neoliberalism which actually reconfigured the state architecture, which has completely reconfigured different institutions of the state, unlike the 20th century, which we had a different state to confront with. and you have fascist social organizations, which poses a different kind of challenge to us. In fact, we have to build revolutionary movement, student movement, facing these two challenges, which are not completely different, but qualitatively different from the challenges that the 20th century student movement had. In fact, if you just span the student movements in the whole world, some of which actually Venu cited as examples, one such student movement is the Palestine itself. If you consider students and youth movement together, the backbone of the Palestine resistance is the youth and also the students. In fact, Rifat Alarir, I think that is the poet who was killed, who was a lecturer, he had brought, in fact, the Gaza University, he was actually teaching the students to write their history of their experiences. In fact, whatever Ravi and Venu is doing, he encouraged the students to write about how it is to live in Gaza in the last 20 years. So Gaza stories was actually written about. And before his death, he writes, if I must die, you must live to tell my story. So that was what Rifat Alarir said, and many youth. In fact, I was wondering, after this 16 months of 400 days of continuous bombing, when there was a little respite of ceasefire or whatever you call it, you find jubilation, you find so many youth coming onto the streets, asserting themselves. This is something that actually gives an inspiration to, in fact, the generation that we are, I mean, even to our elder generations, we heard about the fascist onslaught. We heard about, even during the fascist darkness, there were lights of currents which we actually wanted to glow. In fact, we used to cite always about Brecht, no? Can there be songs about the darkness? Yes, there can be songs in the darkness, about the darkness. But then these are the living stories. How, just imagine what is happening in Gaza. In spite of that, you have hope. And that hope is retained with a vision of a independent Palestine land. A independence of Palestinians. This cause of independence is not about student issues. It is not a transactional agreement between this generation and their cause. This is a philosophical agreement. We need to have that. And of course, continuing with Palestine, you have seen the solidarity, resistance movement all over the country, all over the world. In fact, it is said in the West, if 90% of the youth are coming onto the streets, 40 to 50% happen to be the Yehudi youth. That's why, in fact, Gaidan Levi, the famous celebrated journalist from of Haaretz in in Israel, and also Ilan Pape says that, of course, there will be liberation of Palestine. It may take another 20 years because the next generation will not actually succumb to this pressure. Next generation is completely with the cause of the Palestine liberation. That's what we see in Germany. In the heart of the fascist land, you have Yehudis protesting against Israeli occupation of the Palestinians in America, West, etc. So again, here, it is not a limited cause of campus constraints. There is a larger cause of solidarity with a national liberation cause. If you extend that, of course, Venu cited about Bangladesh movement. If there is an autocracy, there is a movement for democracy. People die, people actually come onto the streets. I can cite a lot of examples from America, from Argentina to Bangladesh. In fact, this whole last 10 years happened to be the spontaneous, sporadic kind of resistances. But the larger questions remain, these are moments, why they are not becoming movements of social change. I think that is the greater challenge that this 21st century student movement actually poses to us. There are two challenges, as I mentioned. Neoliberalism has brought in a different kind of campus atmosphere. I call it a kind of precariat student situation. There is a new word coined now to explain the predicament of the unorganized sector employees. Earlier, during the time of Marx, the association with the advanced technology, and being together as a labor and sharing the common pain, and actually vanguardism. These three things came together, and so that a labor fighting against the capitalist atrocities was easy. But now all the three elements are now dispersed. Unorganized sections are most exploited and most difficult to mobilize them. They are in a situation of precarity. It is very, very difficult to mobilize them, because the very next day is a problem. For these gig workers, the very next delivery is a problem. They can be actually completely taken away from their job in the next delivery, not even next day. Students in the campuses are also living in a same precarious situation. Precarity has come because of the neoliberal restructuring of the university administration and also its contract, and the new NEP you have, which has completely made students very, very vulnerable to the administrative restrictions posed on them. In spite of that, we had Rohit Vemula movement, we had JNU movement, we had Jadavpur movement. Of course, there will be a spark that will actually emerge in spite of this. But why it is not sustaining into a continuous movement? Again, that question remains. And another question which come along with this, the Hindutva rightist forces with their fascistic tendencies, how they are actually maligning, criminalizing, demoralizing the spirit of resistance, which we did not actually face during the 20th century. We had physical attacks. In fact, ABVP used to actually attack us, used to call us as agents, etc. But the campaign was not like that. In fact, I think it is Balgopal or somebody who said that even the landlords who actually had tussle with the Naxalites had some respect towards Naxalites. Why? Because they are raising the moral cause. Their demand and their life, their whole sacrifice is a message of great moral. In fact, that is the morality, and morality is something that the people's movement has with that. If you demoralize that, make them anti-national in the eyes of the people, or make them something demonic, that will be another great difficulty in the eyes of the people whom we mobilize. That is the larger question. How to face this fascist challenge? And also, you have depoliticization, currents of depoliticization, NGOization of this whole spirit. Seva, in the name of Seva, you have both Hindutva forces, you have both NGO forces, actually completely depoliticizing the whole issues that the students are posing. So, in this predicament, how are we going to actually challenge this and realize the larger ideals of the socialism? I come back to that, the moment of the birth of RSU. If you summarize that moment of the birth, it had many answers to the questions that was posed in the 70s and 80s. What were those answers? There was a correct definition of the political situation, the correct definition of the societal situation. Whatever was actually termed as semi-feudal, semi-colonial society, principal contradiction is with the landlords, feudalism, and peasant movement is the axis of revolution, and everything and anything should be to further that. So now we need a similar kind. You cannot repeat the same thing. In the last 40 to 50 years, I am only posing the question, I don't have answers. Whether you can say the very same semi-feudalism operates in the same way, or is it ascendance of capitalism retaining some of the semi-feudal base? What kind of capitalism which is completely casteist in its nature? India is a very peculiar situation. Unless we have a narrative to understand this political ideological current, we can't find the solution. Unless you find out which is the principal contradiction in the present era, you cannot simply explain that. We can go on explaining different facets of the problem, but the question remains. The Marxist, Maoist political education tells us that find out which is the principal contradiction. If you understand fascism is the principal contradiction, How are you going to fight it? Because all over India, there is a kind of experiment which is going on, which thinks that in India, Indian ruling class is also divided as fascist and anti-fascist, which is not so. Many of the progressive people, even the left among them, think that Congress will be the agent of change as far as against fascism to be defeated. So the history tells us that unless you have working class people's own strength, you can't even bargain with the ruling class, a section of the ruling class. So without your strength, if you bargain with the ruling class, you will be co-opted. That is the historical lessons we have had. But then defeating BJP in the elections has become the only motto as far as defeating the fascism. This has created a lot of confusion in many states. So what is the principal contradiction? If it is fascism, what is the nature of Indian fascism? Indian fascism is not European fascism. Indian fascism is not the fascism of the 1940s. What is Indian fascism and how to defeat it? If these questions are answered, and how the larger cause of socialist dreams can be furthered even in this fight against fascism. These are the questions. Unless we have answers to this, I think resurgence of student movement also, unless a people's movement is there, unless a movement, when there is a movement of the people on the streets, campus will also reverberate. Of course, RSU has a great history where Naxalbari gave birth to student movement, and student movement gave birth to a lot of Naxalbaris all over India. We have that history. But now there is a great challenges. You have many issues that we didn't actually philosophically address, politically address. The question of caste, women, environment, mode of development. Do we want to catch up with America? Do we want to become another America? Can the world, can Mother Earth sustain another America of the gigantic size as India? And there is also another projection that if the same way the capitalist production goes on, nobody is sure whether this Mother Earth will survive by 2100. Because another 4 degrees centigrade rise in planetary temperature will cause all kinds of problems all over the world. So we need to answer all these questions, which 20th century we did not have these questions. 21st century has these challenges. We have to answer this. Then only those political, ideological, philosophical answers will also lead into sustainable revolutionary student movement. I think we are all in search of that. As Gramsci put it, we are in a crisis. And what is crisis defined as? When old is dying and is new, and the new is yet to born. Old is dying, new is yet to born, and in this interim period, all kind of morbid symptoms will appear. So we are finding all kind of morbid symptoms. So we need to learn from the 20th century, revolutionizing the democratic movement and democratizing the revolutionary movement. I think these two are the issues that we may have to ponder over, and we need to find answers to the pressing problem of understanding the present juncture. Whatever it is, the philosophical purpose is very, very important for a person to continue in whatever vision. If you contrast the movement of Hindutva forces, they give them a vision of Hindu Rashtra which is full of hatred, whatever it is. They have a vision and mission and a purpose for their life. We need to have, in fact they learned from communists for that matter. Mussolini was an ex-communist for that matter. So we need to actually find that vision, mission and philosophical purpose which RSU gave us, which Revolutionary Student Movement of Andhra not only gave it to the people of Andhra Pradesh, to people like me from different states like Karnataka. Karnataka is completely different. It is not Andhra Pradesh. We don't have a leftist current there. We don't have a revolutionary left movement. The basic intellectual current in Karnataka is basically Lohite or Gandhian. In such a situation, these messages, going to village campaign, study through struggle, actually inspired and I would dare say that it changed the lives of a generation, of my generation. It inspired a generation. I think we need a similar kind of thorough reflection, reflective understanding of our own mistakes and understanding the present era. Thank you again for inviting me. Thank you again for making me to share this glory.